Hello, in this tutorial, we're going to be looking at a really important concept in your skills progression with VBA, and that is file management. I want us to start thinking about data automation not as just simply automating or automating a little bit of tasks like populating cells and doing a little bit of work in Excel for us. I want us to start thinking about data automation from in a, to automate a team's entire data processing efforts. And so as data automators, we think about that as something called ETL, extract, transform, and load. And simply put, that means we can automate data processing from, from opening data in a source system, grabbing the data we need, whether that's Excel workbooks or the internet or some database. So opening that, extracting the data we need, transforming that data in however we need to transform it, and then loading that data back to a source system, again, whether it's the same source system or a different source system. And if we think about data automation that way, um, we can essentially automate a team's entire data processing. And that this is where it gets really powerful. Now, how does that represent in Excel? Well, um, so some really common automation needs we have in Excel are working with workbooks. So opening workbooks, saving workbooks, and closing them. And within a workbook, working with worksheets. So creating new worksheets, moving and copying them around to different places, and then ultimately deleting them if needed. Now, we're going to walk through an exercise together right now, but we got to set it up. And so here's how I want you to set up uh, for this exercise. Number one, you should have a folder on your desktop called Data Automation Course. If you don't have it already, create it. But for now, I want you to, so just know that you're supposed to have that. Um, Go out to our SharePoint site, and we're working in File Management folder, so you can click on that. Now what we need to do is we need to get this file management tax ID data. We want to save this to that folder on our desktop. So I'm going to go ahead and open this. I'm going to say open in Excel. And then I'm going to save it. So save as, desktop, data automation course, and save. Okay, now I'm going to close this workbook. Now you should also have this workbook up. This is called File Management Macro File. So we've done two things here. We've opened this workbook, File Management Macro File, and we've saved File Management Tax ID data to our Data Automation course folder on our desktop. That's going to be really important because we're going to be manipulating this file here. Okay, so what are we going to do? Well, let's come back to our presentation here. So we're going to start by looking at how to use VBA to open workbooks. Now, I want you to imagine that we have a macro file, and that macro file has all of our code in it. And then we have this other workbook here that we've saved to our desktop in a folder. And what we want to do is we want to use code to open this workbook. Now, there's two ways to do that. We can hard code this file name. If we know that this is always going to be the file we want to open, and it's always going to be in the same position, we can hard code that file name, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. Another way to do it is to code in a pop-up dialog box where the user actually goes and selects the file that they want to open. Now, this is pretty clever and useful. So there's two ways we're going to learn how to do it right now. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Open with your file management macro file, open this up. Let's pop our developer window open and explore it a little bit. So I've created two modules, one called Working with Workbooks and the other called Working with Worksheets. Well, our goal here is right now we're learning how to open workbooks. So we're going to find a sub called Open Hard-Coded Workbook. So let's grab that. So let's go to the Working with Workbooks module. And you can see I have three subroutines listed for you here. The first one is Open Hard-Coded Workbook. The second one is Open Workbook with File Selector. And the third one is Save and Close Workbook. And you can see in each of these, I have little chunks of code that are going to accomplish each of these subroutines. So again, our goal right now is to figure out how to use code to open this workbook from our desktop. And in this case, we want to do it in a hard-coded fashion. So let's start at this top subroutine. I'm going to click F8. So we're going to engage this subroutine here and start to work through it. I'm going to hit F8 again. Now you can see that I've set up three variables. One I'm calling file path, another I'm calling file name, and the last one is I'm setting a workbook variable. So what are we setting our file path to? Well, if I F8 through it and hover over it, you can see that the file path is the path to my desktop. Now, that's great because what we're going to do is we're going to use that file path and this file name. Now, if I F8 past the file name, you can see that I hard-coded in the name of that file, file management tax ID data.xlsx. So that's now contained in this variable called file name. Now, if we come to this, this line right here, what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, set WB, so set this workbook variable, equal to workbook.open. So hey, we're going to open this workbook. Well, what workbook are we going to open? We're going to open a workbook that's, you can find, hey Excel, you can find that workbook in this file path, and then this name. And we have a couple variables we can play with here, or parameters. So if we want, this is a really important one for data automation. Sometimes when you open a workbook, there'll be links that want to be updated. And so a dialog box will pop up. Well, we want to set that as false because we don't want have to interrupt our automation to click like yes, please update, or no, don't update. So we want to set that to false, makes it a non-issue. And then this one is read only. We said read only true here. You could set that to false if you wanted to manipulate the data. But sometimes if you're just opening workbooks, you just want to grab the data and then you want to close it. You want to set that to read only true so that data cannot be manipulated in like a source of truth file. Now, there's a problem here though. Notice that our file path isn't up to date because we have this file stored in another folder on our desktop. Remember that it's not directly on our desktop. It's in this folder called Data Automation Course. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to write Data Automation Course and then /. Now if I drag, you can drag this yellow line up. If I drag that back up to reset this value, so now we can see that it's going to look in our desktop and it's going to look inside of Data Automation Course to find this file name. And then if I hit F8 past it, it's not going to work. Oh, it's already open. So let's close that. Let's do that again. So I'm going to stop the subroutine and we're going to walk through it again. So I'm going to hit F8, F8, F8. I'm going to look at this variable. Looks good to me. F8, look at this variable. Looks good to me. So we just opened. So you can see that it opened this workbook here. That's great. And close. So that is how you open a workbook that you've hard coded both the location of that workbook and the name of that workbook. So let's go ahead and close that. I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna close it. Now, there's another option that's really nice, and that is having the user actually select the file that they want to work with. And what's going to happen is when they run the code, a dialog box is going to pop open, and they're going to be able to come in here and select which file they want. This makes your automation very flexible, gives you a little bit of user control. So let's go look at how to do that. Well, again, I'm in our file management macro file, and I'm in the working with workbooks module, and I have this open workbook with file selector. So here I'm going to click there, hit F8, F8. Now this line of code is pretty cool. This runs a function called application get open file name. And you can pass a message into here. I'll show you what this means. So please select correct file. So just remember that I typed that there. Now when I click F8 again, a dialog box is going to pop open. Now I can come anywhere and I can select whatever I want. I'm going to go to Data Automation Course. I'm going to select this and click Open. Now as I go through here, it assigned file path. Notice what it did. It assigned file path, the same path that I have up here. So now we have something called file path. Now I'm going to pass this into workbook.open. So I'm going to hit F8. And you can see that it did the exact same thing. It opened that workbook. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now, a couple things. One, do events. This little chunk of code is handy. It allows Excel to be working on one thing that's going to take a long time. Sometimes it takes a long time to open up a workbook, and it allows Excel to kind of free up the CPU to do other things too. So if you're running this automation and you also want to be doing emails or something like that, do events is kind of clever. It allows it kind of maintains work on this file, but also allows the CPU to get freed up for other tasks as well. So that's a cool little chunk of code. And this one here, if file path equals false, then exit sub. So what happens here is, let's imagine that this pops up, but your user closes it or cancels it. So cancel. So now file path is false, and we're going to exit sub. And that's a really handy little piece of code there. So in this tutorial, we've learned how to work with workbooks, a really important concept of opening workbooks that have been hard-coded, and opening workbooks that gives your user a little bit of opportunity to select which workbook to work with. Okay, in the next tutorial, we're going to look at how to work with worksheets. And so that's going to be like, creating new worksheets, moving worksheets, copying them, and so forth. So be looking out for that next tutorial.